Welcome back, Pugnacious Pummelers. I'm Lupine Fiasco. This is Daily Fab Gameplay, and as promised, I have been retooling the Jarl deck that I've been playing in my videos for the last few weeks. Originally a hybrid build between Earth and Ice for the purpose of playing Felling of the Crown, and now, as you will see as we dive into it, much more ice focused. We've cut the decomposed package completely, we've added more generic Guardian staples, and in this video I will go through each of the changes and give some reasoning as to why. And over the next few weeks I'll be playing this deck on YouTube for my gameplay reviews so that we can all learn how to improve our gameplay and walk away with more of that shiny cardboard. If you've been enjoying the Jarl games so far, thank you so much for watching them. If you want to make sure that you are catching all of my games, all of my videos as they come out, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. While you're down there, in the video description, you can find my Blue Sky, my Discord, my Patreon, as well as the link to this deck list. This deck list is what all of my patrons see as well. The critical difference is that the Patreon deck list has matchups, where this one does not. If you would like to get that matchup guide, you can visit my Patreon. But overall, I've been having a lot of success with Jarl. There are some horrendously bad matchups that mean I would never bring Jarl to a Tier 2, Tier 3, or hopefully Tier 4 event. The primary matchups being Enigma and Kano. They are just very difficult to win. Kano a little less so. I think we can build for that quite a bit better. Enigma just has the same illusionist dynamic that Guardian has always experienced, where you have to really go out of your way to include enough Go Again in your deck to deal with all of Illusionist's auras, Enigma's in particular, based on the fact that very few of them have Spectra or Phantasm. And if you are building heavily for Go Again, for one thing, you're playing bad cards like Zealous Belting or Scar for a Scar, and you are then sacrificing many other matchups in which you would want your big beaters like Spinal Crush, Red Glacial Footsteps. You have to stray away from the Guardian plan of sending very tall disruptive attacks in favor of sending smaller Go Again attacks, and really just not a matchup that we should build for or care about. You are building Jarl, you're playing Guardian, you are intending to dodge Illusionist, just as Guardian players have been doing since Monarch. Outside of that, New is not unwinnable, but is a very bad matchup. You do need quite a bit of luck and hopefully a way to break her Mask of Recurring Nightmares, and we have a bit of that still in the deck, namely the inclusion of Mangle, which I will get into. Viserai can be a bad matchup, as can Florian. Those games really come down to how your defense lines up with their offense or vice versa. If you are on a hand of 4 reds and they Mordred Tide, make 10 rune chance, attack, you're going to take a lot of damage. Likewise, if you have 4 blues in hand and their turn is Mordred Tide, Malefic, Grasp, Pass, you will also not be able to deal very much damage. So a lot of Jarl just comes down to your gem variants in who you're pairing up against, your draw variants, and how your draws line up with theirs. But you are favored in basically any straight aggro matchup because of how much disruption you have and how it's tied to very tall attacks. And if your local meta is very aggro heavy, or you think that we are heading into the Hunted and people are going to be bringing Redline, Syndra, and Fang decks, then Jarl has a place in that meta as long as you can dodge your bad matchups. But I could talk about Jarl and Guardian strategy for minutes and minutes. That isn't why you're here. You're here to know what changed in my deck list. So we have the latest changes. Here are our cuts, which I will walk through one by one. Here are our additions. First and foremost, like I said, we've cut the decomposed package. That includes Felling of the Crown, first and foremost, though it also includes Summer's Fall, that includes So Tomorrow, and that includes Rootbound Trunks. Rootbound, Summer's Fall, and So Tomorrow were never the reason that we played the deck. The reason was Felling of the Crown. So why have I cut Felling? If you've played against Florian or even Verdance, you know that Felling of the Crown is an incredible card when the Decompose effect is online, when there are 4 or more Earth cards in your opponent's banished zone. Felling of the Crown attacks as a 3 for 8, and if they have the Earth cards in graveyard to decompose, then it makes you bottom a card before you get the chance to respond. Obviously incredible. The reason that I am cutting this card is that, for as good as it is when the Decompose effect and bonus power are active, it is horrendously bad when neither of those things are the case. If you draw Felling of the Crown in your opening hand, it is a 3 for 4 with no on hit, no on attack ability, and pitches for 1, which is usually what you're doing with it, because you just need to get it out of your hand and hopefully put yourself in a position to draw it again later. And in certain matchups, like Enigma, like Guardian, like New, that isn't always terrible. You are pretty likely to get to your pitch stack, at which point you will have gone through your deck, you will have put other Earth cards into your discard, you will have hopefully played some Summer's Falls over the course of the game to be able to get 2 Earth cards into your banish so that the next Felling you play does have 8 power. But in the aggro matchups, your Zens, your Viserais, your Auroras, you just don't have time. You aren't going to see your Felling again. The game will end before you hit your pitch stack, for the most part. And at that point, this is just a 3-block. It's a red 3-block that attacks for 4 when you are unlucky enough to need to play it. Aggro decks, Zens, Auroras, Viserais just go so fast that I don't want to build a deck that is subject to drawing the wrong half in the wrong order. I want to have a deck that's consistent, that is consistently doing things, disruptive attacks, big damage, pumping up our Command and Conquers, our Spinal Crushes with cards like Icequake or Pummel. So Felling of the Crown is a great card that our deck cannot easily support. And there are Jarl builds that support Felling of the Crown. Ed Knight has been playing around with an Earth-heavy Jarl that I think is really worth testing, but for my own purposes, I am playing more of this Ice-heavy Jarl. That's what some of my personal friends have been on and have talked about their success, so that's what I want to try. Felling and a hybrid build just isn't something that I feel the meta can support at this time. You're either going to get outraced because you drew a bad card like Felling of the Crown, or you are just now playing for a long game, but not doing yourself any favors in getting there. So if we're cutting Felling, we're going to cut Summer's Fall, we're going to cut Rootbound Trunks, and we're going to cut So Tomorrow and replace them with better cards. At least better cards for what we have going on. So moving up in our list of cards that we've cut, we have cut our Coronet Peak, and we have cut our Summit the Unforgiving. And the two mostly go hand in hand. The reason being that we have replaced Summit with Titan's Fist. Titan's Fist attacks for 4 if we pitch a card with cost 3 or greater, but even if it's attacking for 3, we pitch a blue to use it. Titan's Fist takes the place of Coronet Peak, which was our mana sink when we had a blue in hand and nothing else to do with it. We would just pitch to Coronet Peak, get a card away from our opponent, unless they had Tunic up, in which case we were very sad. Now we are replacing Coronet Peak with Titan's Fist as our way to use a blue in hand to get value. And because we're playing Titan's Fist, we're not going to play Summit. Summit is a card that I have been excited about, and I've said in other videos that I was excited about Summit as a 2-card 6 that has the potential to apply a Frostbite, but the more I play with Summit, the less I like it, and there are 2 reasons for that. The first being that if we are equipping Summit, we are also equipping Stalagmite as our shield, and when we have an offhand, Summit costs 2 cards to attack for 4. You also need to get one of your opponent's equipment slots in order for Summit to have an on-hit. So if Summit does not have an on-hit and you have your shield, this is a 2-card 4, which is exactly what Felling of the Crown was if the Decompose effect wasn't online. Even as you go forward in the game, your Stalagmite breaks, your opponent loses one of their equipment slots, and Summit becomes a 2 for 6 with Frostbite on hit, you can still run into problems late game if you draw into a hand that necessitates you keep a red as one of your 2 cards. Against Runeblades in particular, I've had experiences where I've needed to pitch blues in order to prevent the arcane damage that would kill me, but that leaves me with a red and a blue in hand, and a Summit as my only way to pitch cards, and I cannot pitch a red and a blue into Summit to do anything. Similarly, you just put yourself into a position with 2 blues where you want to pitch them into something, so you would pitch them into Summit, but then you're attacking for 4. Maybe your opponent only attacked you for 2 and you have 2 3 blocks in hand, and you think, well, it would be better value to take 2 and return 6, but you're only returning 4, and it takes you both cards to do it. And if you block with one of those cards, maybe your opponent has their Spring Tunic up, so pitching a blue into Coronet Peak doesn't even get a card away from them. Summit can be very good in these fatigue, long, grindy games where the 2 for 6 that does something is very strong, but in most of the games in which I'm bringing Summit, I really do wish it was Titan's Fist. So the fact that we are cutting Summit for Titan's Fist then enables us to cut Coronet Peak and replace it with Crown of Providence, which we will get into in just a minute. The only 2 cards left to talk about cutting are kind of minimal. First, I'll just mention Polar Blast. Polar Blast is a great effect, being an ice blue that we are not embarrassed to arsenal after we fuse it for an Oakenold. We can use our Tunic to play it from arsenal. It makes a Frostbite if our opponent has an open equipment slot. It has a minor effect on play, but more importantly, it draws a card so that we can turn our Tunic and 4 cards in hand into 5 cards in hand. We can pitch a blue to play Polar Blast, draw a card, effectively make your own energy potion. But the reason I am cutting Polar Blast is to replace it with Cold Snap, which we can talk about in just a bit. There isn't a lot to say here. In the longer, grindier matchups, any kind of hero is going to care about their arsenal, so Cold Snap will likely have an effect, but would probably get the one resource that your opponent would be able to put into Polar Blast anyway. Where Cold Snap is a lot more useful is in the aggro matchups against your Auroras, Zens, Viserais that might not care about Dominate, either because they still have armor to block your dominated attack, or they're just racing and don't care about any on-hits or damage. Cold Snap says, well, if they have an arsenal, they probably care a lot more about their arsenal, and even if they are just willing to take damage, you are effectively taking a card away from them because they can't play out that arsenal. Cold Snap still has the draw a card if played from Arsenal clause, so we are not embarrassed to arsenal it after fusing with Oakenold. Effectively the same card, just better against aggro heroes that wouldn't otherwise care about Dominate. Finally, I've cut Heart of Ice and replaced it with Null Rune Hood, still maintaining that AB2. I would maybe like to think about getting AB3 in a future build, but the reason to cut Heart of Ice and replace it with Null Rune Hood is, in my experience playing against Kano, which is the only matchup I'm bringing Heart of Ice in for, if Kano has it, Kano doesn't care that you kept 3 cards in hand after pitching a blue to Heart of Ice. Kano's still gonna go for it, because the way modern Kano is built is with Will of Arcana, with Kindle, potentially with Cindering Foresight. He is still able to get that Aether Wildfire up to 6, 7, 8 damage. We are only bringing AB2, but even if we were bringing AB3, that is going to be enough for Kano to get 3 or 4, depending on your Arcane Barrier situation, on the Wildfire to get at least 3 or 4 onto their Open the Floodgates, which means that they are going to draw the 2 cards, they're going to keep stacking damage. Kano, much more of a casino hero than he was previously. If Kano draws the nuts, he is going to kill you no matter what your hand situation is, whether you have 4 cards in hand or 0 cards in hand. So let's not worry about Heart of Ice. Let's not worry about that preemptive, before my attack, at the start of my action phase, I'm going to pitch into Heart of Ice and make you do the thing. Kano is just going to be able to do the thing. So by playing Nullrune Hood instead of Heart of Ice, we get to still bring our Spring Tunic against Kano, which at minimum says that every 3 turns we get an extra point of Arcane Barrier, and at maximum says that every 3 turns we get to pummel off of a Command and Conquer, or Frostfang. So that is a quick rundown of all of the cuts from the deck. Again, Coronet Peak and Summit come out because we're running Titan's Fist. Rootbound Trunks, Felling of the Crown, Summer's Fall, and So Tomorrow come out because we are cutting the Decomposed package in favor of more generic Guardian attacks. Heart of Ice comes out because we want to play our Spring Tunic against Kano, and Kano doesn't particularly care about the Heart of Ice effect. And Polar Blast comes out to make room for Cold Snap. Now, moving into the additions to the deck, we'll start with the equipment, which is mostly serving to fill out what we cut for the Decompose package. Civic Steps blocks 3, where Rootbound Trunks blocks 1 at minimum, or 2 if our hand composition is correct for triggering the Rootbound Trunks effect. Civic Steps is just good. It is much more of a skill check because you need to know when it is safe to give your opponent a Quicken token, but with enough practice, that should be easy enough to intuit, especially against the aggro heroes, your Zens, Auroras, Viserais, that already have Go Again, or you would expect their next attack to have Go Again anyway. Civic Steps just says, block 2, give your opponent a Quicken that they don't need. And against your News, Jarls, Victors, Enigmas, well, that's what daily Fab gameplay is for, to see those blocks in action and see how we do or don't hurt ourselves to inform future decision making. But blocking 3 with your boots is just good. Likewise, Crown of Providence blocking 2 and getting you out of a bad arsenal, perhaps after a fused Oaken Old where your 2 cards needed for fusing weren't really something you wanted in your arsenal, and that could be a few different cards. On the Earth side, we have Autumn's Touch or Fruits of the Forest as Earth cards that we really didn't want in our arsenal. On the Ice side, we have maybe Crumble to Eternity or Frozen to Death as cards we just needed to arsenal so that we wouldn't take an intellect penalty. Crown of Providence gets those out of the arsenal and replaces them with a new card in hand. It blocks 2. Coronet Peak did as well. What Crown really does for us is give us a leg up into Assassin. New is one of our very bad matchups. So Crown of Providence giving us a get out of jail free card in the face of a Command and Conquer or a Leave No Witnesses that we really didn't want to block. Says that we get to take a turn off of worrying about disruption and can hopefully then take tempo back on our next turn. Crown of Providence is just good. Nullrune Hood, as I've talked about, is the replacement for Heart of Ice. I still want to bring AB2 into every wizard, or into at least Kano. And what Nullrune Hood does in the head slot is let us replace Crown of Providence, which does literally nothing against Kano, and lets us run that Vandal Spring Tunic. I've talked a bit about Titan's Fist, namely in how it is our way to turn a single blue into value after we've blocked out, rather than pitching to Coronet Peak. The other thing that Titan's Fist really does in that same vein is let us block 9 and then return 4 on our turn. We get that 13.4 card hand, typical of any Guardian, but it does let us play more defensive, which is not a line that Coronet Peak really let us use, especially when our opponent had Fandal Spring Tunic online. Titan's Fist is a 1-card 4. If we were able to pitch a blue that has cost 3 or greater, of which about half of our blues are, maybe more than half, I believe it's 19 out of 35 that cost 3, so more often than not, any blue that we pitch into Titan's Fist will attack for 4, but even if we're attacking for 3, that's still fine value. and Titan's Fist does still let us play with Stalagmite. Adding another Icequake, this is just a means of putting more disruption in the deck. I was intentionally on 2 copies in my previous build, now moving up to 3 because I have a little more room, but could certainly see going back down to 2. One of Mangle is a card that I am experimenting with under advisement from teammates, that the one of Mangle is fine. We play our Crumble to Eternity. We still have 2 exposed to the elements in our deck. These are ways that we can put -1 counters on our opponent's equipment, and then the one of Mangle that we can either pitch stack to find later, Arsenal if we find a kind of mid-game, and it especially can pair with Gauntlets of Boreal, especially if we're pitching a Crumble to Eternity or Pulse of Isenloft to make it a 10 power attack dominate. Very good for just clearing out that one of Arsenal slot, one of Equipment slot, but the real use of Mangle is in the new matchup when we really need to break Mask of Recurring Nightmares. So Mangle here as a one of, I'm experimenting with it. I'm not married to the card. I think overall Mangle still sucks because Crush as a keyword really sucks. But taking it under advisement, trying it out, could totally see replacing it. I'm hoping it works well. I'm hoping I've been wrong about Mangle. 3 of Spinal Crush. Spinal Crush is a great card, as much as the Crush keyword sucks. This one being serious disruption to the top aggro decks in the format is very exciting. It is a 3-card 9, which is fine. The other nice thing about the card is if our Spring Tunic is up, we can use that and play a Pummel after pitching 2 blues to attack with Spinal Crush. So we do have the potential for a 4-card 13 with quite a lot of disruption stapled to it. Spinal Crush is just an old reliable piece of Guardian tech. It kind of fills the same hole that Felling of the Crown left in our deck as a big dumb beater. Of course, this one demands a card if you still want to, or if our opponent still wants to have a turn and not be crushed, where Felling of the Crown demanded a card because that was the way the card read. Cold Snap, I talked about. This is the replacement for Polar Blast. It just presents an effect that aggro decks need to care about, rather than Polar Blast, which said this has Dominate. The aggro deck probably isn't blocking anyway, so Cold Snap just says care about this, where Polar Blast did not. One of Hypothermia and one of Insidious Chill kind of share the same spot in the deck. Both are ice auras that we can tutor out with Imposing Presence, or Imposing Visage. We can tutor them out with Imposing Visage, or play them if we draw them early. Insidious Chill is definitely a much better turn 1 high roll if we can get this out. Hypothermia is our anti-aggro card. It does very nice work against a lot of Zen's biggest turns. Chase the Tail is probably his primary card, Aspect of Tiger Body being the secondary of effects. Attacks that do gain Go Again, but don't naturally have it. So if you can Hypothermia on your Zen's big combo turn, if he was going to transcend multiple times from hand and use multiple cards to find Tiger Swipe or Chase the Tail or Aspect, this is your way of stuffing that turn. Aurora, similarly, has a lot of attacks that don't naturally have Go Again, but do gain Go Again if a certain condition is met, and Hypothermia gets to shut all of that down. Against the slower decks that are not going to send so many attacks that gain Go Again, your Jarls, your News perhaps, we of course play Insidious Chill. Insidious Chill comes into the arena with 3 frost counters on it. It does not lose frost counters naturally. It does not go away on its own until it runs out of counters. The only 2 cards that we fuse with are Frozen to Death and Oaken Old, but if we can pair either of those with the Insidious Chill discard or pay 2 effect, it is very nice, especially because Insidious Chill can be used or rather it is a mandatory effect, but it happens before blocks. So if you attack with an Oaken Old and then fuse it, Insidious Chill triggers, your opponent loses one of their cards in hand that they could otherwise use to block the Oaken Old. But even if they weren't going to block Oaken Old, at the minimum, you are putting them from 2 cards after Oaken Old hits down to 1 card, and they are much less likely to have any kind of meaningful crackback. The best use of Insidious Chill is with Frozen to Death, especially after you have played your Crumble to Eternity or Exposed to the Elements, fusing it with Earth, because Frozen to Death does not have Go Again, and you need a blue in hand to pay for the Frozen to Death and an ice card in hand to fuse it. So you are needing to keep 3 cards to do no damage on your turn. Take one of your opponent's equipment slots, sure, give them a Frostbite, but if they're on 5 cards, they're probably going to be able to pay through the Frostbite and deal a ton of damage because you haven't presented them with any kind of pressure. But having Insidious Chill on the board before you've Frozen to Death says that your opponent goes down one of the cards in their hand, either by paying or discarding, and hopefully that stems some of the bleeding after their crackback to your Frozen to Death, and then you can start to regain some of your tempo now that they are down one of their equipment slots. Notably for Insidious Chill, compared to Cold Snap or Hypothermia, this card does cost 3, so you can pitch Insidious Chill to your Titan's Fist if you draw it late enough in the game that maybe the effect isn't really valuable anymore. You've already played out all 3 of your Oaken Olds. You don't expect to be able to use Insidious Chill. At minimum, you can pitch it for 4 points of damage. Finally, we have Nerves of Steel. This is also a 3-cost blue, so you can pitch this into Titan's Fist to deal 4 points of damage. But the real reason we're playing Nerves of Steel is for the Assassin matchup, and specifically new. The first line of text on Nerves of Steel is very good, but does not matter to us because we only play 1 piece of chest equipment, Fandral Spring Tunic, which has Blade Break. If you block with your Tunic, then you lose it. Maybe there's some world where your opponent has somehow applied a point of Battle Worn to your Tunic, maybe a drill shot. Maybe against a Jarl, they played their own Crumble to Eternity and Nerves of Steel lets you remove it, but that isn't why we're playing the card. We're playing the card for its second line of text. Battle Worn and Temper on equipment you control doesn't trigger if it defends an attack with 2 or less power. The reason we are playing this for new specifically is so that we can block a dagger with our Stalagmite, give New a Frostbite that will prevent her from hopefully playing out a reaction, or maybe your New pitches a blue, has a Codex in hand, has a Tunic available, attacks with dagger, plays the Codex, picks up Command and Conquer, uses the Tunic, plays the Command and Conquer. If they have a Frostbite, they can't do that. Or your New leads with Bonds of Agony. You get to block it with Stalagmite, give them a Frostbite, and maybe that prevents them from paying for their 3rd attack reaction to get Bonds of Agony to trigger. If you are playing a critical amount of defense reactions, maybe you have a Sink Below in hand or a Staunch Response in arsenal, and you can block whatever the New does after you block with Stalagmite, then you get to keep Nerves of Steel. Your Stalagmite does not gain a Battle Worn counter. Nerves of Steel here mainly for the Assassin matchups, but you could find other uses for it. It's a blue block 3 that turns your Titan's Fist into 4 points of damage. So those are all of the additions and subtractions to the deck. I do have the maybe board still updated, mostly just with cards that I took out after making these changes. We have Felling of the Crown, Summer's Fall, Plow Under, Rootbound Carapace, Rootbound Trunks. We have a whole decomposed package in here, as well as Enlightened Strike. I am still choosing to disrespect Illusionists. I don't feel like E-Strike makes a significant enough difference in those matchups that I want to play with it over something disruptive that can mess with aggro. Fate Foreseen is a card that I've seen other lists running. I am choosing to keep red Winter's Bite in place of Fate Foreseen as a turn extender that is disruptive against many decks. I have been impressed enough by Winter's Bite that I want to play with it over something like Fate Foreseen, but I could absolutely see adding a 4th, 5th, and 6th defense reaction to the main board in order to just get more value out of our cards and sustain more through damage and disruption while we look for our Command and Conquers or Frostfangs plus Pummels, or our double fused Oakenolds or Spinal Crush or Dominated Mangle. We have our Earth package in here. As I said, Ed Knight is having a lot of success with Decompose. Earth Heavy Jarl is something I want to experiment with at some point. Getting our Fellings, our Rootbound Carapace, and our Plow Unders into the main deck, as well as more So Tomorrows. But very quickly, the one concern I have about Titan's Fist, which overall I am very happy to be trying Titan's Fist. I've been very dissatisfied with Summit lately. But my one issue is, as I said, out of 35 blues, only 19 of them cost 3 or more, and actually get to turn Titan's Fist into a 4-power attack. My concern would be that if I find in my games that Titan's Fist is only attacking for 3 most of the time, and if that 3 just isn't good enough compared with slowing our opponent down with Coronet Peak, then I would replace Titan's Fist with Summit and get Summit back into the deck. As much as I don't like it, it may just be a necessary evil based on our play patterns, right? If we're looking at our blues, Winter's Bite does not turn on Titan's Fist. Blizzard, no. Channel Lake Frigid, no. Channel Mount Ison, no. Cold Snap, no. Crumble to Eternity, no. Frozen to Death does. Fruits of the Forest does. Footsteps does. Vishids does. Insidious Chill does. Pulse of Ice and Loft does not. No, yes. So most of our blues just don't do it, and I'm really not trying to overpitch to pay for a Titan's Fist. I don't want to have to pitch an Oakenfold and a Blizzard to Titan's Fist. I like the fact that I can do that, which was not a line I have available with Summit. But overall, we'll be watching that blue count and watching how my deck interacts with Titan's Fist. So that is the update for this week. Going much more ice heavy, returning to some of those Guardian staples like One of Mangle, particularly Spinal Crush. We're going to try it out. We're going to see how it goes. Let me know how your games with this deck are going if you are also experimenting with Jarl. We have a few more weeks of Jarl gameplay before we get our Hunted set spoiler, the full thing. That lets me start deck building with Syndra, with Fi, and getting back to our old reliable Draconic Ninja. But enjoy more Jarl games to come over the next month. I should have at least one more deck update coming, if not 2 or even 3, as we maybe get some more Earth back into the deck, so watch the channel for those. If you haven't already done so, please consider a YouTube subscription. It's free, helps me out a lot. I have a Discord, a Blue Sky, and a Patreon. Those links are all in the video description below. My comments are always open for any questions or feedback, and of course, I would appreciate you Titan's Fisting that like button. Until the next time I see you on Daily Fab Gameplay, take care.